Hello, hello. Good afternoon. I hope you are enjoying today's session. Have you wondered how you can improve the experience of your developers within your community, your team, or your organization? My name is Emel Mendoza. I am Solutions Architect at AWS. And in today's session, I will walk you through Amazon Q Developer and how you can use Q to improve the experience of the developers and IT pros in your organization and your team. So yeah, let's get started. So before jumping into technicalities for Q and the demo that I prepared for you today, I need to provide some context about the AWS stack when it comes to GenAI. So I will be brief on this. And of course, if you have experience working with AWS, you will probably notice that we offer choice to customers, and this is not different when we think about GenAI stack. So our approach basically focuses in 3 layers, so from bottom to top. In the bottom, we have the infrastructure that we provide to our customers for them to develop LLMs, foundational models, and this is basically all the power compute infrastructure that customer needs to do this. And this includes GPUs, chips, Amazon SageMaker, and so on. Then we have the mid layer. And in the mid layer, we have Amazon Bedrock. So Bedrock is AWS managed service, and you can use Bedrock to have access to LLMs and foundational models. For example, just calling an API. And in this way, you can integrate GenAI capabilities within your application. And in the top layer, we have applications that leverage LLMs and foundational models to basically provide GenAI capabilities to your team, to your application, without ingesting a single line of code. And this is actually where I would like to focus today, particularly in Amazon Q. So Amazon Q, and I will go in technical details of Q in a moment, basically can be used for multiple things. So use cases could cover things like Amazon Q for Business, Connect, QuickSight, and Q Developer. And Q Developer is actually what I'm going to focus during the rest of the session and the demo. Now, of course, this is also based on my experience when I was working as a DevOps, as an SRE, and also what I have been seeing on the field with my customers. Developers and IT pros, they do a lot of things, right? They don't only make sure that applications are running, but they also need to start doing all the planning to understand how the roadmap is going to look like, which features are going to be included in that next release. And all of this aims to modify the code for your specific application. And within the Terraform domain, this basically maps all the code that you need to write as infrastructure as code to have your infrastructure ready in multiple environments, as we have seen during the talks during the day. But it's not only about writing the code, but also make sure that the tests are done accordingly, that, as we saw in the previous sessions, we have our code stored in an encrypted way, that we are not just burning credentials there and following the best practices. And finally, when your code is ready, well, we deploy our infrastructure in an AWS environment in this case, and we start checking that the infrastructure that we deploy, that the resources that we deploy in our environments are working accordingly. And based on this, as it could happen in multiple cases, we need to keep iterating on what we just deployed. And this brings to basically maintaining the application and keep rolling the cycle, and so on. This is, of course, not different to what we have been seeing on the field as AWS, but also in the experience of many of us. Now, I think until now, this is something that we can expect when we are operating our infrastructure, and this is when the need to provide help to devs and IT pros come from. Now, I have been working for AWS a couple of years now, and in my previous jobs, I have always been using Terraform. Definitely, I am a very big fan. And also, as part of the AWS team, I had the chance to collaborate with many customers, and I could have been exposed to use cases helping them. So, of course, remarkable achievements like 2 billion downloads of the Terraform AWS provider on the Terraform registry, but also other cool things that I have been seeing around there. Things like product type support for HTTP Terraform in AWS Service Catalog, and one of my favorite features for Control Tower, that is AFT, to automate the process of bending new accounts and apply customizations into it. And this is actually quite relevant, since this also shows how we have been collaborating with HashiCorp during the recent time. And I see also a lot of potential for that when it comes to GenAI and Amazon Q developer in particular. So by definition, Amazon Q is a GenAI-based assistance that basically developers can use or can leverage to do multiple things, as we just saw in the SDLCL lifecycle. So things that developers and IT pros can leverage on Q: writing code, do all the planning and exploration phase, so things that I used to do with 20 or 30 tabs in my browser, just reading documentation. And of course, moving forward, do things like security scanning and make sure that everything is compliant as the best practices that you have determined in your team or in your organization. So in a nutshell, Amazon Q is intended to transform the experience of the developers and honestly make their life easier. Now, I have prepared a demonstration for you, and I would like to spend most of the time in this demonstration to show how we can leverage Q for these particular use cases. And before doing that, I would like to set up some extra context. So a couple of cool things that we are going to see in the demo. I am going to simulate Bob. Bob is a new developer, and Bob just joined to DevOps team, and Bob wants to leverage Q to basically deploy an S3 bucket using Terraform Cloud. So things that we are going to see in the demonstration are, first, the exploration and planning phase. This is what we are going to deploy, try to understand which is the environment in which the developer, Bob, is going to move for this particular setup. We then are going to deploy an S3 bucket. And once we deploy this S3 bucket, we are going to follow the whole step-by-step that is generating the code, make sure that this code is appropriate to deploy the infrastructure. And once this infrastructure is deployed, this S3 bucket, we are going to make sure that everything is placed in an AWS environment. And this is actually what I tried to map with this slide. So let's get started. So the first thing you will need to do to start using Q is how you can install it in different ways, but I choose one that is very familiar for me, that is go with Q in IDE. And I am going to simulate what Bob is going to ask to, for example, Q, to understand how he should start working with Q. So the first thing is, hey, I would like to understand what is actually Terraform. And of course, here we have some experience working with Terraform in different flavors. We have ambassadors too. But we also have developers that they make new to the concept, or they decide to start using Terraform because they joined to a new job and they are in a new team. And after that, we start iterating with Q. And I really, really like this because this is actually like conversational coding. So I am expecting Q to provide me with insights about what I would like to deploy, and which is the environment that I'm going to start using. So in this sample, I just did the exploration and planning phase. I want to know more about details over Terraform. I learned from my stakeholders, my platform team, that we use Terraform Cloud, and I want to learn more about this. So this is the exploration and planning phase. So at this point in time, Bob is ready to start writing the code that Bob is going to use to deploy the infrastructure in the AWS environment. Now, the creation and generation of code. In my experience, and probably in your experience too, this is one of the most time-consuming tasks that we need to do when we are mapping our infrastructure, especially when we are doing migrations, especially when we want to deploy new infrastructure and roll out new resources in our environment. So let's see how we can leverage Q and how we can iterate with Q to accelerate this process. So my first question is, I want to deploy an S3 bucket in a specific region. And I think this is a very valid starting point, and it covers the basics. And when we have this information that Q provided us, that is a group of lines of code, we need to start iterating and improving the code that Q generated at first. So let's do something more advanced, like mapping variables to define the name of my S3 bucket. So then I keep using natural language to talk to Q and say, hey, Q, I really want this variable, and I want this variable to be mapped to the name of my S3 bucket. Of course, this also requires to have a basic knowledge about the resources that we are deploying, and the interaction will change depending on your particular use case. But we can keep iterating on it depending on what we want and what we are expecting with our use case. So the next step was asking Q, hey, I like what you provide me, but I actually don't need lifecycle rules. Can we keep iterating on this? And then we have a recommendation or a code generated by Q that removes this part. Now, something that I really like, and the reason why I put this into the demonstration, was actually asking Q for pieces of code that map a natural way of communicating. So I, for example, I ask Q to generate some lines of code to map on a specific tag based in my environment, based in the team that is using it. And I can see how Q provides this code recommendation and add it incrementally to the code that it had generated in first place. So now I am in a good position to start evaluating how I'm going to deploy this S3 bucket in my AWS environment. Good. So we talk about the operation part. And in my experience working with customers, I have seen this as one of the points that really needs to be defined to guarantee that everything is going smoothly when different teams are operating between each other. So in this example, I am going to use Terraform Cloud to deploy an S3 bucket and discover when, for example, a new dev or a new ops team member joins to an organization and he wants to rely on the guidelines that a platform team already defined for that purpose. So again, I go to Q, and I want to start iterating over the requirements that my platform team already shared with me before I can deploy my S3 bucket. So using natural language, I start asking Q, hey, I need to use Terraform Cloud, and I know that this is going to change the code configuration that I put in my previous step. Can you help me with a piece of code that I can include here? And then, of course, once the first piece of code was generated by Q, I move forward trying to fine-tuning, again, the recommendation that Q provided. So things like, please provide me the workspace name, please provide the organization, are information that we need to modify the code that was generated. So again, I ask you to do this, and I add this piece of code within my Terraform configuration. And then, of course, it comes the time to actually deploy the infrastructure using Terraform Cloud. So these three steps basically cover what a developer would need to do to getting started and trying to accelerate and be more agile in the process of generating the code and have the Terraform configurations in place. Now, of course, in the demo, I run the Terraform lifecycle, so my init plan and apply for this, and the resources should be deployed on my AWS environment. And let's actually check that this is the case. So then let's review our deployment. So I access to my HTTP Terraform environment. We have been seeing multiple snippets today about HTTP Terraform. And I choose this as a way of simulating how a platform team already determine how they are operating in a specific organization and how developers or new team members that join IT Pros can see this when they want to get started. So we basically deployed an S3 bucket using HTTP Terraform, and we then start checking that the lifecycle was completed successfully. So then we have the plan phase, in which we have our plan that was successfully completed, and we have the apply that we executed in our AWS environment. So of course, I choose the S3 bucket because it's a resource that we may be familiar with, but also because it has multiple components that could be configured. So we can keep fine-tuning this using conversational coding to make sure that the piece of code that we want to use for this particular use case is completed. Now, if we recall the number of steps and lifecycle that developers do in a daily basis, I want to map now how Q can help in each phase. So as we saw in the plan phase, you can get information and exploration about how your environment, when it comes to deploy Terraform code, is defined within your team or within your organization. We then do, to me, the most impressive part, the generation of code snippets, which could actually be way longer depending on your environment, and for sure it's going to be way longer. But it's also when I can see a lot of improvement in the experience of the developers, because you get one single point in which you can start iterating to generate your lines of code. You have the chance also to do security scanning with Cube. So due to the time that we have available today, I couldn't showcase in the demo, but it's a feature that I think it will be well appreciated because it also gives developers the opportunity to make sure that they are following the best practices defined by your organization. And when it comes to the operation phase, definitely all the process of executing from your IDE, your Terraform lifecycle, and the chance of troubleshoot potential errors, operate in a faster way. And finally, an important point that is maintain and modernize the infrastructure, because this is something that you do in a regular basis. It's not that I just text in queue in my IDE and deploy an S3 bucket and I don't do anything else. I keep iterating this, and this is when this recurrent process provides flexibility and agility for the developers, and overall improving the whole dev experience. Now, I would like to wrap up on the 3 major use cases that I have been seeing on the field for Q, especially when it comes to the deployment of infrastructure as code and Terraform resources. The first one is retire the tech debt at the scale. And this is because infrastructure as code, of course, provide a way of being dynamic over time and keep evolving your infrastructure when you move on your cloud journey. The second major use case is definitely drive developer productivity and agility. And finally, the third one, but for sure one of the most important ones, is improve security and code quality, which is very well aligned with all the best practices that we have been seeing during these sessions. Now, call to action, that is pretty much straightforward. Try it yourself. So within the QR code, you have a link to an easy way to access to Amazon Q developer information. The setup is quite straightforward, especially for your IDE. And of course, start trying it how you would use it within Terraform, HCP Terraform, and infrastructure as code particularly. And with that said, I also would like to kudos and highlight the hard work that the HashiCorp team have been doing to support Amazon Q team. So the collaborative work to put this in place and that different customers and teams can use in the future and benefit from it. So yeah, thank you very much and have a good one.